Hey, welcome to Con Carolina's Television. I am Bronner, and we are back for another wonderful episode here on Con Carolina's Television. And tonight we are going to talk about cryptids. And it's near and dear to my heart because I'm fascinated, utterly fascinated with the topic. And I'm here with my co host, Nick.
Hey, what's up? Happy to be here. I'm very excited too. I really am interested in cryptids too, and I also have a good amount to learn. So I'm really happy that I get the opportunity to interview these wonderful people who know way more about this than I do.
Super experts, and we're going to let them introduce themselves to you. And we'll start with Cheralyn. Uh,
Yes. Hello,
which you
everyone.
guys may all know and love from previous episodes. And she's Con Carolina's faithful, and I think so is Tina actually. So
Yeah,
one love them both. But
thank you. And I'm really glad to be here tonight. As Bronner said, I'm Cheralyn Lambeth. I go by Cher, like the singer. And I am, among other things, a member of the Charlotte Area Paranormal Society. And my specialty within the group is I'm a cryptid researcher. I really enjoy studying and learning about cryptids, those strange creatures that are out there like Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster. And hopefully we'll learn a little bit about some cryptids here tonight.
awesome. And who did you bring with you that today?
Tina, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Tina Mcswain, and I'm the founder and director of the Charlotte Area Paranormal Society. I have over 25 years' experience in the realm of the paranormal, including cryptids, ghosties, and UFOs from time to time.
All fascinating subjects. I mean, I love them.
I was gonna say now I want to talk about aliens.
Right? Right?
We can
Right?
do
That's
that
gonna,
on
we'll
another
have
show if
another
you
show.
wanted.
Eventually, yeah.
We will have
Yeah,
another show.
We can. That's
definitely.
the next show. We can do that. Yeah.
Add that to our list there, Nick.
Yes, ma'am.
We can certainly make that happen. All right.
Absolutely.
Love it.
So we do have some questions that we're dying and chomping at the bit to ask you guys, because we want to hear from the professionals.
Speaking of aliens,
Oh,
we'll get into a strange correlation between
Mhm.
Bigfoot and aliens
oh,
as we
really?
move into the show.
I'm utterly anticipating. Nick, why don't you start the questions off, and I'm going to talk to the chat a little bit.
Sure, sure. Let's just start out with the basics. Just tell our audience a little bit about yourselves and how you became interested in cryptids. Like, what motivated you to specialize in the study of cryptids? What's fascinating about it to you? I guess what was your sort of like genesis for how you got involved in this?
Well, and I can certainly start with that. I've always been interested in a good campfire story about Bigfoot and the Loch Ness monster. It's a really interesting field to study, and the I approach cryptids from an actually a very interesting angle. So my real job is I am a professional costume prop and puppet builder. I worked on puppets for various productions. I used to work with the Muppets. I worked on Dinosaurs and Muppet Christmas Carol. I worked on Sesame Street Live for many years. And one of my current jobs is I work on Sir Purr for the Carolina Panthers. I help keep him looking good for all the games. So I am not a professional creature scientist, but I am a professional creature builder. And so I know many of the things to look for in some of the evidence that's presented that make me think that might not necessarily be an actual cryptid. It might actually be a person in a suit. So I'm a skeptical believer. I want there to be a Bigfoot. I want there to be a Loch Ness monster. But looking at much of the evidence that's presented, it's sometimes difficult to think that it's anything more than digital enhancement or a misidentification of a known creature. I tend to think many cryptid sightings are the usual animals in unusual circumstances. And we can certainly talk about that more later.
Very cool. Very cool.
Super interesting, and
Okay. And for me, being the director of the Charlotte Area Paranormal Society, that encompasses a lot of the paranormal world. Whether we're investigating for ghosts or um, cryptids or UFOs, it's kind of all in the same ball of wax for me, if you will. So I'm interested in cryptids and UFOs just because I'm also interested in ghosts and other aspects of the paranormal.
right. I think that they all kind of
I too want to believe that there is a
walk hand
Bigfoot,
in
but
hand, right?
we'll have to wait and see.
Absolutely. Yeah, they do go hand in hand. And as Tina was saying, there has been a lot of research done and a lot of documentation to show that UFO sightings and Bigfoot sightings often go hand in hand, which is interesting to note. You know, if you, and it doesn't always happen, but if you look up, for instance, out especially in the West, the Pacific Northwest, if you look up many
Right.
instances of UFO sightings, there's usually a Bigfoot sighting not too long after. So that's kind of an interesting correlation.
Hmm.
Oh, very
It is, and especially out in the Northwest, there are a lot of UFO believers who propose the idea that Mount Shasta is, has a UFO base underneath it. There's a lot of times there's UFOs seen in that area. Well, right there is where, your cryptid hotspot is too for Bigfoot in that area. Even in our Uwharrie Forest down here in North
I
Carolina,
love that place.
I know a group of big hunters, if you will, and they tell me that we really need to come out there and come with them, one night that they're on one of their expeditions because of the um, strange other things that accompany them while they're out there looking for Bigfoot, as far as, strange lights in the sky and even what we think might be even ghostly phenomenon down on the ground along with that.
Yeah, and in fact, someone in the chat, I think it was Nerdburger, had mentioned that one of his friends actually saw or had a sighting of Nobby in Kings Mountain, which is
Oh yeah.
local. So that's exciting. I mean, those are both areas I frequent. I go to Uwharrie all the time. I fish there. They have a range there. I go and do some practice, target practice. I've never seen Bigfoot there or anything like that, but I'd want to really bad. We've camped there several times. So, with all the bumps and creaks and cracks you hear at night, you know what? It might be factual that something is out there.
I gotta ask a question.
Yeah,
Did you say Nabi?
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
what is Nabi? Could somebody explain? I'm not familiar with this,
Yeah,
but that sounds
Stephanie
amazing.
just asked what Nobby, what is Nobby in the chat. So
Nobby is actually one of North Carolina's resident Bigfoots or Big Feet. And he has been cited numerous times. There have been reports of Nobby, but that's the name that our particular Bigfoot goes by, or one of our particular Bigfoots goes by. So when you hear somebody say they've had an encounter with Nobby, that's our local Bigfoot.
Very cool.
see,
Wow.
did not know that.
Yeah, learn something new every day. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, Nerdburger says it ranges from Rutherford County to Gaston County.
Yep. Yeah.
So that's exciting because those are close.
They are close, and people think of Bigfoot as being in these huge, expansive forested areas. But there have been sightings of Big Feet here in North Carolina in fairly populated areas. Wilkesboro, for instance, has had sightings of a Bigfoot, and as you said, Nobby has been seen in areas close to big cities. So it's kind of interesting to note that Bigfoot appears to be going urban.
I mean, wouldn't you though? I mean, I would if I was a Bigfoot. I
Hmm.
mean, and I'm close to being a Bigfoot. I'm on the cusp.
There's probably better food
Myself,
out here, yeah.
like
But yeah,
Bigfoot
I'd
just
like
need
to
to
go urban.
get on a wireless plan. He wants his modern conventions.
All right. So, where are we at? Where did we leave off there? You're making some
So
edits here on the fly, I think.
thus far, we've kind of learned just a little bit about what motivated them to get interested in cryptids in the first place. I guess maybe before we go too far, I feel like cryptid is a term that gets thrown around a lot, and I mean, I have a pretty decent understanding of what it is, but maybe for some people in the audience who don't know, or maybe for some people who always have kind of like heard the term and generally know what it is, would you mind just sharing like what you think is like a decent definition of what a cryptid is with our audience, and then like maybe some examples, and how do you tell the difference between like a cryptid and other forms of like legendary creatures from folklore?
Well, I can certainly give you a good definition, and then I can let Tina certainly talk about the difference in other creatures in folklore, because we were just talking about this evening. But a cryptid is basically an animal whose existence has not been proved by science. And certainly the best known examples, of course, are Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, the Mothman that was seen in Point Pleasant, Virginia. There are lake monsters, various lake monsters all over the world. We, of course, have our very own lake monster here in Charlotte, the Lake Norman monster. And so, cryptids are basically animals that have not yet been proven. And again, as I said, I tend to think many cryptid sightings are usual animals in unusual circumstances. So it's misidentification, but not always. And I can certainly let Tina talk a little bit about the difference between a cryptid and other types of creatures that are out there.
Tina, are you there?
Yeah, especially in the Native American peoples around, especially in the United States. The Navajo, for example, have something that they call a chindi, and they will leave this chindi as a guard, guarding over their sacred burial grounds. Now, this chindi is basically a shapeshifter. If it decided to look like a Bigfoot, then it could, or it may look like a bear or a wolf. But that is more of a, um, especially given Native American stories, the folklore, told down through the ages, through the ancestors. But they're more of a menacing or frightening type being, so that people stay away from burial grounds or other areas
Sacred
that
places.
the Native Americans have left something like that as a guard.
Mm-hmm.
You have over in the Europe and Iceland area, well, they talk about fairies or elves or gnomes, especially in Iceland. Elves are, thought to be um, living around, in the rural areas. If you were to say maybe uh, try to run a road through a rural area, all of a sudden your equipment doesn't work. Well, maybe the elves got a hold of it. But again, those are more like what we would call an elemental, and don't fall into the category of an animal or a being such as that. So there is a difference between a cryptid and Native American folklore beliefs, and some of the animals that they talk about, as well as there's a difference between a cryptid and an elemental.
Okay, so let me ask you about what people that I've talked to talking about cryptids, but they're using terms like the chupacabra or the duende. I don't know. Do they fall into folklore? Or do they fall into a cryptid environment?
Well, it's interesting to know the chupacabra is actually a pretty recent invention. Reports of a chupacabra, which the term basically means in Spanish goat sucker, didn't actually appear until about the 90s. And so that, there was an episode of the X Files actually that really kind of brought the chupacabra into modern mainstream folklore, so to speak. So that's kind of a fairly recent invention. Although I will say it's interesting to note that here in North Carolina, we kind of had our own version of the chupacabra back in the 60s with a creature called the Beast of Bladenboro, the vampire beast of Bladenboro, which was this creature apparently spotted out in eastern North Carolina that was going around killing livestock and basically sucking their blood, like the chupacabra. So probably creatures like that existed, but the chupacabra was just a name given to it. And as I said, that's a fairly recent invention. So I guess in folklore, the idea of a blood-sucking animal type creature existed, but the name itself didn't come into light until recent years.
I know that in growing up in Southern California, right next to the Mexican border, and half my life has been spent with Mexicans and Latinos, and so I've heard about the chupacabra long before I saw it on the X Files, because it was part of their tradition and part of their folklore. But
I think I've lost audio. I can't hear you.
Uh-oh.
That's not good. Can you not hear everybody or just me?
I hear you now.
Okay, good.
Okay, good.
I could see Cher's mouth moving, but I couldn't hear a thing she was saying.
Oh,
Good. Okay.
But so that that kind of leads me to the question of is it a valid cryptid, or is it certainly just folklore or legend?
I have seen reports that they've caught, for instance, coyotes with mange. And they believe that that might account for many of the reports
Mhm.
of chupacabras. If you've ever
Ah,
seen, it's again an unusual animal in unusual circumstances. We don't often see a coyote without its fur, and so when we do see one, it's not a figure we recognize. And if
right,
we've
right.
ever actually seen one, it looks terrifying.
I
It's a
imagine.
skinny creature with big teeth, and it's not one we recognize, and so of course we assign another name to it or another thought to it. But does it account for all of those? Who knows? I mean, there have been many reports of chupacabra attacks now, not just in Mexico, but in parts of the U.S. as well. So, is it a creature that spread? It could very well be.
I mean, that's a movie right there. That should be a movie. The Coyote with Mange. I mean, movie. We need to make that.
Oh my
It
Put it
it
on
does
the
get
list.
really terrifying. It really does.
I can
yeah.
imagine. I would be freaked out. Regular coyotes freak me out. Just the way they cackle and laugh.
Same thing. Same thing with bears. I mean, there in the North Carolina mountains, there was a story several years ago about, they were trying to get this bear that had the mange, and they were trying to, you know, get it some help. So again, a bear with mange without fur would be even scarier than, a coyote without fur, because it'd be a lot bigger. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah, actually, you kind of touched on something that I find interesting and pretty fascinating. So, obviously, there's a variety of different reports of sightings of various different cryptids, and some get disproven, some haven't been, or I guess stand up to scrutiny better than others. How do you generally determine the credibility of eyewitness accounts? Like, is there sort of just a general rule that you operate by when you're looking at these things, or is it more just, I guess, paying attention to like if they get disproven or not? Like, what is your general process for when you hear about an account?
It's really hard to determine the validity of a sighting without being there yourself. It's There are so many reports of, for instance,
right.
Bigfoot, and there are a lot of pictures out there, but many of the photos, again, they're blurry, they're grainy. It's hard to really see what might actually be there. So, is it a Bigfoot? Is it a bear? Sometimes it's really hard to tell. But you were just talking earlier about some hunters, some actual hunters who are
Right.
out in the field. People who are out in the field who see these types of things every day, like actual bears out there, other animals that might be out there. You tend to take their reports a little more seriously because they know what should be there and what isn't normally there. So
Oh,
that's
these
something.
were these were
Yeah.
bona fide hunters. They have hundreds of videos on YouTube about hunting, and then they have this one video about and Nerdberger just mentioned it in the chat, the skunk ape.
Lost audio
Oh
again.
yeah, skunk
And
ape.
so the skunk ape is and their video is pretty compelling, and I dropped the link to the video in the CCTV production booth, so hopefully we can get the link to the chat, and people can look at it for themselves and figure that out. I mean, it's pretty compelling video, especially when it's
Skunk ape?
backed by these two hunters and their recollection of it.
Yeah, skunk ape is a version of Bigfoot, and there have been a lot of reports of a skunk ape, as it's called in Florida. And the reason it's called skunk ape is because it apparently just reeks, it stinks. And that is actually one component that seems to be consistent with many Bigfoot sightings is that they're accompanied by an absolutely terrible smell. And so they're even throughout the world, not just here in North America. So the skunk ape is one of our North American versions of the Bigfoot. Now, with video, with pictures, it's often hard to tell perspective. Something that's big and far away might look small, or something that's smaller but closer might look
Right.
really big. Yeah. So
Especially if
again,
you don't have anything to correlate the size in
exactly.
the footage.
Yeah, exactly. So it's sometimes hard to tell what you're actually looking at. But yeah, it's always interesting to hear stories from people who are often out in the field who know some things that are there and some things that shouldn't be there.
Yeah, they had just mentioned in the chat about the Thunderbird.
Oh, the
Um,
Thunderbird.
so apparently there's been Stephanie's a friend of hers saw in Indiana, and of course they were talking about it in around these parts as well. So I mean, these things travel, or there's a plethora of them. There, like you say, there's Bigfoot sightings all over the world, right?
Yes.
So
And the
these things
Thunderbird,
aren't just isolated to a certain area. They're spreading their wings per se.
yeah, the Thunderbird, it's interesting to know we have had sightings even here in the Charlotte area as recently as I think it was either 2018 or 2020 of what looked like pterosaurs or pterodactyls. And there was a report in Raleigh too, not too long ago, of a lady who swears she saw a pterodactyl or a pterosaur, which of course looks very similar to a thunderbird. So that's another cryptid that
Couldn't that be a Mothman too? I mean,
we
technically,
might have our own Mothman. I just recently learned, we all know about the Mothman of Point Pleasant who apparently
right?
predicted the fall of the Silver Bridge. But apparently, a few days before the meltdown at Chernobyl, a big, giant black winged creature was seen flying over the reactors for several days beforehand. And so apparently, the Chernobyl
Wow.
has its own version of the Mothman. Yeah, I just recently learned that myself. So is it a giant winged creature that predicts disaster? Who knows?
Yeah, they just put the footage in the chat of the skunk ape and of the Bigfoot, the ones that I found most compelling. Um, but yeah, if you have other stories, sightings
I
or
keep losing the
encounters,
audio. I can't hear you.
oh boy.
Uh-oh, we've lost Tina again.
Can
Because I was about to say, Tina has an amazing.
Yes, I don't know what it is, but
how about now?
and then I keep losing audio and I can't hear you.
Can you hear any of
Okay,
us?
that I can.
Okay. Tina, I
Yes,
was going to say, tell your
I can
Bigfoot
hear you
story.
when you just said that.
Okay, tell your Bigfoot story.
Please.
Okay. I will tell my Bigfoot story. Several years ago, in the little town of Kaser, is in the North Carolina mountains. There's a town called Kaser, and there was a witness to a Bigfoot sighting, and the gentleman told his story. He said that this Bigfoot had long blonde hair, and the reason that he knew something was going on is that he had dogs outside in kennels. And he said the dogs started barking. So he goes out there to see what might be, causing them to bark. And he sees this blonde haired Bigfoot. And he starts talking about how he thought the Bigfoot was kind of messing with the dogs in possibly some sort of sexual way, if you will. One of the dogs was in heat. So he says he gets this big stick and he starts to chase the Bigfoot off. And he takes the stick and he says, get. And, tells us this whole story. Our team went up and interviewed him. Now, the gentleman's name was Pork, Pork. Pork. And he told this fantastical story to us. The Bigfoot was, right there at him, but of course he had no pictures. There was no tracks left right in his vicinity, but apparently further down from his property, they did get a Bigfoot uh, footprint. They did take a cast of it, and in the case or bait shop up in that area, they do have the Bigfoot cast that they got from Pork's property. But little bit, that was one of the ones where it was a little bit fantastical, too fantastical for us to believe that a Bigfoot was really in Kaser, North Carolina at that time. This was around the 4th of July several years ago.
Wow.
Hmm.
I got to go to Kaser.
It became
Road
so
trip.
the get part of it was told so much that one of the famous newscasters, the weatherman, I'll just go ahead and do it, was Larry Sprinkle. Larry Sprinkle really had a good time with this story and actually brought a get stick to work one day and was
Get.
talking about Pork and the Bigfoot and the get stick. quite the comical end to that story.
That's funny. Larry Sprinkle having his way with the get stick.
Pork. Yeah. I guess I have a follow-up question to that. So if you mentioned that there was some skepticism and that it's possible that Pork was a little mistaken or perhaps stretching a
Inebriated.
little bit. Do you have
Mhm.
so in your expert opinion, like
Moonshine.
do you feel like you have like any insight into what Pork might have actually seen? Was this just like a Cali surfer with long blonde hair? Or
Could have been. I mean, at this point, it could have been his ex-wife. Um, I really think he was just looking for some sort of, recognition so he could get on TV. Or, I mean, that's the feeling that I kind of got, that, you know, it was a sensationalized story, but I'm not sure what he saw, if he saw anything.
All right, so that
Could have been a bear.
that leads me to a
Could
question.
have been a brown bear.
Have you come across any cryptid sightings that have been you found particularly compelling or intriguing? Um, and
Lost
and I know
audio
that
again.
he asked about the eyewitness reports, but I want to know about your personal, um, experience with that.
I personally have not seen a cryptid. I have done a lot of research on the topic, and I would love to see one. We have a lot of cryptids here, just in the Carolinas. We've got probably close to 20 at least, and I would love to see one of them. But I personally have not seen a cryptid. However, I look at the reports, I look at the sightings, and as I said, some of them turn out to be not necessarily a cryptid, but a few years ago, so here in North Carolina, we have a possible cryptid called a wampus cat, which is actually a Cherokee legend of a woman who has turned into a cat. And there was a sighting a few years ago of a strange creature around the Tycho plant near Fuquay-Varina in North Carolina. And it was interesting to me to note that in many of the interviews in the newspaper and the news, many people automatically jumped to the assumption that it was a wampus cat. And I thought, wow, people actually know this cryptid and they're thinking we have one here. Well, after some research, it turned out that this cryptid was actually a creature called a Samson fox, which is a fox that, due to a genetic condition, has lost a lot of its fur. And again, we don't usually see that. So it looked very strange to everybody who did see this creature. But I thought that was kind of interesting that people automatically jumped to the idea that it was a wampus cat, as opposed to, for instance, a fox that has lost its hair.
And I mean, can you blame that or attribute that to like the internet? I mean, let's face it. I mean, it's a powerful tool.
It is a
And
very
it-
powerful tool. Yeah.
and a powerful persuader. So
And it could be, I have to wonder where people might have gotten that term from, because again, it's a Cherokee legend here in North Carolina, and you hear a wampus cat mentioned in other areas as well. But I thought, wow, that's really interesting that these people automatically assumed that that's what it might have been.
you kind of see that these stories or these sightings and stuff, I mean, they get their own legs because people want to believe so badly in something that's unexplainable or unknown or just fantastical, like Tina was saying. Who knows what the validity is of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't doubt that many people see something strange, and like the hunters you were just talking about, it's just so hard to tell just from photos and videos and eyewitness accounts that what is that creature that's actually there. Is it a Bigfoot, or is it maybe just an abnormally large bear, or a bear with mange, or who knows?
Right. And especially in this day and age, you would think that, I mean, we have the technology to get crisp, clear pictures,
Yes.
4K. I mean, why is every picture and every video of Bigfoot sighting blurry and crappy? I mean, why? I mean, there's got to be someone out there that's got a 4K camera that can get us some good footage. Right?
And I would love to see that. Although it's interesting you should say that. One theory is that Bigfoot is actually an interdimensional creature. And so he kind of phases.
He messes with the cameras and electronics.
And that's why it would why you would catch only a blurry photo. That's one theory. So yeah, that's
Bigfoot is universe hopping as they're taking the picture every single time.
He's phasing in and out. He's in the Spider-Verse right
It's kind
now.
of awesome.
exactly. Yeah, even the Native Americans, the indigenous tribes, have had some stories of Bigfoot being like a spiritual creature as opposed to an actual living creature.
Huh.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I personally, and I don't know if it's legend or if it's folklore or what it is, but I am utterly fascinated with the duende, which is kind of like a leprechaun creature that is also South American in origin. And some of the videos that you see are actually great quality and very compelling videos of things that are going on, and they're very mischievous, and they're very. But I don't even know if they're a cryptid or not. I mean, what? How are they defined as a cryptid? Maybe you guys know.
Well, and as Tina was saying, there elves and fairies kind of cover a broad band of creatures, so to speak, or entities, I guess might be a better word. And Duende, from all the research I've done or all the things I've seen, they seem to fall more into the category of what we would consider an elf or a fairy, or like an elemental type creature as opposed to a cryptid.
Mhm.
And then I haven't seen a whole lot of video. I'll have to actually look up and see if I can
Yeah,
find
look it up because it's
Yeah.
pretty awesome stuff, and you don't know what's fake and what's real or whatever, but some of it is utterly frightening.
Well, and I will say too, and again, this ties into South America and going back to unusual animals and unusual circumstances. Quite a few years ago, a couple of boys, I think it was in Brazil, they were walking along a creek bank and they stumbled on this animal that looked like it was an alien. It was like no hair, it had huge claws and kind of this weird shaped face, and they were terrified of it. They threw rocks at it and ran away. Well, when a research team came back, they discovered that what it actually was a sloth that had lost all its fur. And so again, it just looked absolutely terrifying. And I can see where people would mistake that for an alien or a cryptid of some
Oh, for
kind.
sure.
But so yeah, in terms of Duende, who knows? Are they elementals? Are they actual little entities that live down there? It would be interesting to do some more research on that.
To me they're almost in the land of it, the evil leprechaun. You
Oh
know,
yeah,
that they're very trickster oriented. They're very mischief kind of entities. I would describe them as an entity. I don't know if they're corporeal. I don't know that. The footage that I've seen of them almost seem to be like they are um, an element of some kind. Not maybe vapor, maybe shadow, but nothing concrete. Like, oh yeah, that's like a little doll or something. No,
yeah.
it's more of like well, it's just something that's playing tricks on you and is probably a little evil, I would
Well,
say, which probably what freaks me out the most about something like that is because I don't do evil real well.
Well, definitely. I don't think any of us do. And it's interesting. You talk about leprechauns. We always here in America think, oh, leprechauns are these happy, jaunty little creatures, little elf type creatures in green suits and leading to the pot of gold. But leprechauns were actually they were also mischievous and not necessarily good. And
Right.
it's always been interesting to me to note that Europe has a much different approach to that tradition than we do. Here in North America, at least, like, oh, those things don't exist. Whereas in Europe and England, Great Britain, they absolutely exist and they treat them with respect.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they do.
that's
It's
kind of,
kind of like the Krampus and Santa Claus kind of thing. You
yes,
know,
exactly.
we
Yeah.
we we picture Santa Claus as this jolly
Happy
old Saint Nick
Halloween.
kind of thing, and some other countries and traditions have it as a very not so nice monster.
Not necessarily a nice tradition. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
So it's interesting. I don't know. I mean, is Krampus a cryptid or is it a folklore?
I would call Krampus folklore.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
that makes sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I kind of want to talk a little bit about this idea of skepticism, because I know that there's a Yeah, that's a huge dimension to cryptids. Is there's people who believe in them, there's people who are skeptical, there's people that are kind of just out there, and like if it is ever proven, if they ever see it, they'll believe it, but aren't quite sure. Um, I guess my question is, how do you respond to skeptics who dismiss cryptid sightings as hoaxes or misidentifications? Do you feel like that's valid and true, that these are just things that are misconceptions, or do you feel like there's some real truth and some real like validity to the idea that there have been actual sightings of these cryptids?
Well, and I can certainly go with that because I said in my experience as a creature builder, I've learned more and more how easy it is to actually fake the evidence. And I want to believe, I want there to be a Bigfoot, and I want there to be a Loch Ness monster. But looking at many of the photographs and evidence that I have seen so far, I have yet to see anything that I or one of my movie colleagues could not have done as well or maybe even better. There are, I'm sure you're all familiar with the Patterson Bigfoot film, the famous Bigfoot film that was taken in 1967 in the Pacific Northwest that shows the Bigfoot looking back over his shoulder. Yeah. Well,
it's basically every Bigfoot image that's out there, like cartoon image, is that very familiar stance and whatever, right?
Yeah,
exactly. Well, knowing what I know now, I could look at that video and pick out a whole handful of things that made me think, yeah, this is a guy in a suit, and here's why I think this. And so I believe there is actually a lot of thought or validity to suggest that many, not all necessarily, but many cryptid sightings or reports actually are either misidentification or sometimes outright hoaxes. In, I believe it was 2008, two hunters in Georgia claimed to have caught and killed a Bigfoot and put the corpse on for sale on eBay. Well, somebody actually bought it for about $10,000. And when they got it, they realized it was actually a rubber gorilla suit with some deer entrails. So it didn't even necessarily need to be that complicated. So
were they able to get a refund?
But sadly, no. But they did end up selling it for some more money, and the money went to like some type of wildlife preservation. So hoaxes do exist, sadly, but there are definitely a handful of sightings out there that are hard to explain. And so, yeah, I do want to think that there are actual cryptids out there.
Okay. And I guess I have another question.
Especially too, Cher,
What was that, Tina?
No, you're good.
I was gonna say too, that's okay. I was gonna say that, especially to your point, some of the older, like one of the first, photos of quote unquote the Loch Ness monster is a black and white photo from what, over 50 years
It was
ago.
1934.
So I think in that regard, yes, something. So it was in that regard that would be harder to fake than something that today. I mean, it could have been done,
Well,
but even back then, I think the older documented cases, I think, would be harder to fake than today.
well, and you're right in many regards. Although we'll say if you're thinking about what's called the surgeon's photo, which was taken in, I think it was either 1934, mid 1930s, that actually was proven to be a fake because one of the people who helped work on it gave a deathbed confession and provided some other photographs. It was a toy dinosaur head put on a toy submarine and put in the water, and they took photos of it. And so sadly, that's pretty much the photo that we all see of the Loch Ness monster, and that has been proven to be a fake. But there are others out there that have not been.
Right, and I've seen a documentary about Nessy.
Yeah, the one I can't think of the one I'm thinking of, but it was more of just like not the head, but like almost like a rippled body or something. And I cannot think of where I saw that, but it was an older photo.
Yeah, I've when I've watched the documentary on the Loch Ness monster, I mean, they went through great extremes of like debunking the photo. I mean, putting, like so many tests and things to it, and they didn't, validate the photo at all, but they did validate the photo in ways that I think is pretty admirable, and that's why so many other people saying, yeah, we saw the same thing, or yeah, we have pictures of the same thing. So they validated it by other
Can't
people's
hear again.
experiences.
Well, and there are definitely a lot of great photos of Loch Ness, and even recent photos that they haven't been able to determine what it was. So, yeah, I definitely want there to be a Nessie. And lake monsters are all over the world. We actually have one, as you guys know, here right here in Charlotte, our very own Lake Norman monster. So there are reports of lake monsters all over the world and have been for centuries.
Hmm. I guess also along the lines of skepticism, I think one of the biggest things that would disprove a lot of skeptics is if there was like ever any like scientific discovery that proved that a cryptid was real. Has there ever been a situation where like something that was believed to be a cryptid was discovered to actually be a new species or like a new creature?
I can't think of any specific instance where a cryptid was determined to be a different type of creature, but I can tell you this kind of segues from what we were talking about with the Loch Ness monster. Back in, I think it was 2018, it was the mid 20 teens, a research group from New Zealand trawled the entire length and width of Loch Ness trying to find Nessie. Well, they didn't find Nessie at that time, but they did discover a new species of sponge that no one knew had existed before. So, in that sense, the scientific research into cryptids actually produced some scientific research in other areas, which I thought was kind of cool.
Kind of cool.
So, yeah,
That is
it's
cool.
interesting to see how cryptozoology and cryptid research does lead to other scientific discoveries.
I can only imagine that. I mean, the world is so vast, and I mean, just look at our oceans
And
alone.
we've not even touched the
Oh yeah,
depths of the ocean.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, there's so many in the Marianas Trench, and it's so big just in general that we may never be able to, map the whole ocean. And there's probably things down there that would be brand new to us, and possibly even a cryptid to us
mhm.
if something came up from the very deep, like giant squids, for example. Giant squids live so far, underneath the water. When they come up, it's very rare that you even, see one. And I know recently, maybe in the last year, I saw a documentary where fishermen had actually caught a giant squid in one of the nets. And I mean, this thing was huge. So it could have been the root of sea
Right.
monster stories.
Actually, you're correct, Tina. You just made me think, and that kind of answers your question about cryptids being discovered to be other creatures. The kraken. We've all heard about the kraken, the giant squid that comes up and
Yep.
attacks boats, and they have discovered enormous squid, as Tina was saying, way down in the depths. There's a type of squid called a Humboldt squid, and it's larger than any other squid that we've discovered so far. And as Tina said, that could very well be the basis for the kraken. So I guess that could be an instance of a cryptid discovered to be an actual creature.
Yeah, wasn't there something also about like the mountain yeti in like Tibet or something that proved to be another species of uh, ape, but it was not. It was undiscovered until then, and now they know it now as some sort of albino white ape type thing.
Other type creature, yeah, exactly, an albino ape. And again, it's an ape that doesn't have the normal coloring that we usually see, and so it looks like an odd creature to us because we've never seen it before. We don't often see that type of thing. So yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I
Right.
gotcha.
What are some other cryptids that we need? I mean, there's some that in the chat. They're saying Ogopogo
Oh yeah,
is
Ogopogo's a lake monster.
yeah,
Yep.
that's what they're
And again, there are
saying.
lake monsters all over the world.
And then there was a reference that the coelacanth was thought to be
One thing I found
extinct.
interesting about the world's lake monsters was if you run, across where Loch Ness and Lake Champlain is, and the I can't think of the name of the lake in China, share. But if you look at those, they're almost all along the same longitudinal uh, lines. So I thought that was interesting that, you know, you could almost draw a line from, the Canadian lake to the Scottish lake to the Chinese lake, and it would all be in that same, um, parallel running around the earth. I just wondered if that had something to do with sightings. I mean, have we gotten possibly uh, an ancient, reptile? I mean, not a reptile, but an ancient dinosaur, as we would call it, plesiosaur or something, that is still in existence and is living in the colder waters, but not somewhere that we can absolutely find when we need
Right.
to.
Well, and that's definitely
It's
one of the
always
thoughts
a
that,
thought process
yeah,
that had anything to do with it.
that's one of the thoughts that, there's been speculation that Nessie, Loch Ness monster, might be a plesiosaur, an extinct dinosaur. And yes, Bronner, you were talking about the coelacanth, is what it's called,
Yeah.
was a fish that was
Yep.
thought to be extinct for many, many years. And they caught one back in the 30s, proving that it still existed. It was still here. It just hadn't been seen up until that point. And the coelacanth is actually one of the things that has been used to think, well, if a creature like the coelacanth can still exist, could a dinosaur or a plesiosaur exist and
Right.
be the Loch Ness monster?
Right. I mean, that's logical to me that they would
Yeah.
make that inference.
Yeah, I think that coelacanth was caught like off the coast of Florida, if I remember correctly.
They're saying in the chat it was between Africa and Madagascar.
Okay, yeah, that sounds correct. Yeah. That it was thought to be extinct, and then here somebody caught one, and we now know that yes, they're
Yep.
still out there.
See, I love that. I mean, that just gives me hope for Bigfoot. I mean, because Bigfoot could be an extinct thing that we've never even seen before. That it was never really extinct. You know what I mean?
And that is true. In fact, one speculation is that Bigfoot might be a descendant of or part of a ape-type creature called the Gigantopithecus, which is an extinct ape, of course, millions of years ago, but it fits many of the characteristics of the modern Bigfoot: the stature, the big frame, of course, the big feet. So, that is one speculation too.
See, and that has some credence to me. I mean, that kind of gives it a little more validity, especially as a skeptic. I mean, I want it to be real, but
Yes.
I don't have any proof. It's like being agnostic. How can I just have no proof of anything, right? Show
Yeah.
me something. The proof is in the pudding, right? Show
Same.
me a clear video or
Yeah.
or firsthand account or something along
Exactly.
those lines.
That's how I feel too. Like I said, I haven't yet really seen any compelling evidence for me. There have been quite a few people who've said that they've got Bigfoot prints with dermal ridges. Like, how can you fake that? Well, you can fake that. It takes a kind of a professional, creature builder setup, but it can be done.
I mean,
So if it can be done, then yeah,
with 3D printing, you can pretty much do anything.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think for me, like one of the big like skeptic points is the idea that like, you think of like some of these creatures for how long ago they were first identified or they were first reported to be sighted, right? And then now we're in like the 2020s and you have people that are still saying, "Oh, I'm seeing Bigfoot. Oh, Bigfoot, yada yada yada." But for me, I'm like, I guess my issue is that this creature would either have to be very long lived if it is the same one, or if it isn't, then it's reproducing, in which case there are other members of this species that exist and it can find mates and it can reproduce. But for endangered species in the wild, that's a very a very difficult task, a difficult hurdle to overcome. So many species when they reach a small number, they just die out. So for me, I do find it hard to overcome that belief of like, how does this one instance, how does that defy the rules of nature that are normally in place,
Well, and that's true. And that is one argument that against
Right. And
Bigfoot being there, because breeding populations You would have to have breeding populations to be able to sustain a community of these creatures for an extended period of time. Food, what do they eat? Where do they find the food? Is there enough food, whatever they eat, to support them? So, that is one argument that they don't exist, is that there's just nothing out there in terms of resources to support them. Now, then the flip side of that is if they're spiritual creatures, as many indigenous tribes have in their traditions, they wouldn't need that type of thing.
Right.
One other thing that people often argue is, well, no one's ever come across a Bigfoot corpse in the woods. Well, I've never myself come across a bear corpse or a deer corpse in the woods.
Good
So nature does its job. The scavengers come in and almost completely, demolish it in a very short period of time. So, that might not be an argument for or against. But yeah, how do they survive? Do they have
I
what
mean,
they
at
need?
very least, it's an excellent point.
Yeah.
I've never ever come across it. I think I may have come across like a snake skeleton once, but I mean, come on, I mean
And
that's facts.
and I can't hear if you're being asked a question, Cher. I've never heard the questions that are coming to you that you seem to be
Oh,
answering.
Lord.
But one thing that comes to mind for me is, in the disproving, there's never been any, how like hair, hair caught on trees or anything of that nature. I've not seen anything like that. And just like today, we go out to digs for dinosaur bones. There's not any dinosaurs running around now. At least there's bones, where they used to live on the earth. We've not found any bones. We've not found, like you said, any corpses. And I've not seen, where anybody's found any um, unidentified hair fibers that we can't come up with. So, again, you know,
Yeah.
I tend to believe, my personal opinion, I tend to think they're more of a spiritual being, that the Native American belief purports because of the lack of anything that we're finding,
Yeah.
bodies, bones, even waste, even
Yeah.
waste, that would be different.
Yeah.
But kind of a counter argument to that would be that, I mean, it's a needle in a haystack, right? I mean, these wildernesses are so vast, and like, I mean, you pointed out you didn't run across a deer carcass or a bear carcass ever, but I mean, so it's perfectly plausible with a small group or a small I don't know, family, or I don't know what you called them, community of these types of creatures, wouldn't leave that big of a footprint, if at all. Excuse the pun.
Yeah. Well, and that's true. And there have also been thoughts, like theories, that Bigfoot bury their dead just as we do. And if that's true, then of course we won't find, a Bigfoot body just lying in the woods. But if you think, many, many people sadly disappear in our national parks every year and are never found again. So, it's not unlikely that something could be in a park, in the vast territories that we have, and really never be seen or found.
Right. That totally, Bigfoot is off the grid. But
Yeah.
Nerdberger made a good point that fossils occur
I would
in
agree. I would agree with
specific
that, Share, because
instances.
if they are real, well, then they're bigger, stronger. They're able to move through, dense forests that we as humans just can't get to. So
Yeah.
they could be, above, you know, 10,000 feet. They could have, different, bigger. They would have bigger lung capacities. They wouldn't have to worry about, the higher up you got, the thinning of the air. Whereas humans, we just can't exist for too long a time in those conditions.
That's
So,
true.
taking a look at the time, I see that we're getting close to the end. So, I kind of want to end by thinking about the future a little bit in terms of cryptid research. I guess my question is, what do you see as the future of cryptid research? Is there a role that technology might play? And are there any upcoming projects or breakthroughs that excite you, or maybe any that you're involved in yourselves?
Well, and I think, as with ghost hunting, for instance, cryptids are becoming more and more mainstream, particularly Bigfoot. There's so many shows, TV shows out there right now,
Mhm.
Expedition Bigfoot and many others that are focusing on trying to find or learn more about Bigfoot. And I think that's really ramped up interest. And I'm personally excited that there is research still going on, and we do have a lot of technology. Drones, for instance, we have drones that can now fly over dense forests that we couldn't see
Mhm.
before, and we have lidar technology. You may have seen the lidar technology that can look through the dense foliage of a forest and determine anomalies on the ground. And I suspect that includes something like a Bigfoot or other cryptid type creatures. So I absolutely am very excited to see what modern technology might find in terms of looking for cryptids such as Bigfoot.
Same thing with drones. They also have thermal and thermal imaging, which can pretty much find heat signatures, and then based on the heat signatures, kind of give us an idea of what we are looking at.
Right, kind of
And
an
something
outline.
that I am interested in is actually our satellites. There are so many satellites out there, and they can just actually dial down and read a license plate. So I
Crazy.
actually watch a show where it's called you know What on Earth, and it's satellite images that are seen from space that are strange patterns or uh, buildings or whatever it is on Earth. They go investigate, and they found a lot of ancient sites and things like that. So that might be an avenue, to be able to check satellites moving over dense forest. Maybe you catch something that
Hmm.
needs more investigation. At least it would pinpoint the area that you need to go to.
Right. Awesome. I mean, that gives me a hope. I mean, maybe there'll be a job in it for me. I mean, I'd love to review the footage.
Yeah, me too.
All
I do have
right. Well, I
well, I
guess
have
that
one
brings us
final
to the end.
question.
Oh, one final
One
question
final
from
question.
Nick. Oh,
Final
sure.
question. This one's a personal question.
Okay.
Um, is it possible that cryptids are actually just real life Pokemon? And if so, how would I go about catching one to be my partner?
You need a
I would,
Pokeball.
I would love for cryptids to be real life Pokemon. That would actually make me very happy because they would be a lot easier to catch.
Yeah.
And we know all the Pokemon or most of the Pokemon.
Mhm.
So yeah.
I want a Gengar. I mean, let's catch a Gengar.
Well, there's a Thunderbird. It could be a Zapdos.
There
That's
is
what I'm saying.
there is a
All right.
Thunderbird. There absolutely is.
Hmm.
And a Mothman could be
Mothman.
Aerodactyl.
Mhm.
Yep.
Maybe.
It could be.
Right. All right. Well, I'd love to
Mhm.
thank you guys for being on the show, even though we
Thank
had some technical difficulties. And hopefully, for future episodes, we can get that kind of ironed out. Apologize to the audience for that, but I think we did a good job at handling it. I mean, trying to give you a little break here and there so that we can let you finish what you had to have, on your mind. But unfortunately, you couldn't hear us. Very well. But so we apologize for that, and hopefully we can get those kinks worked out for future episodes or whatnot. But love you guys being on the show. Love the topic. Love the chat. Thank you guys for being very engaging. Uh, just in parting, I'd like to say that if you go to concarolinas.org and you click on the purchase badges, you can get yourself a discount by just putting in the discount code for October, which was, I believe, what was it? Sean, do you remember? Was it Friday the 13th? Okay, well, I'll get that to you and we'll put it on the CCTV fan page so that everyone can get the discount that's looking for a badge, or just hit me up. Oh, fall, FALL is the promo code. My lovely wife just informed me. So yeah, put in fall, get your badges, and thank you guys very very much for being on the show. It was a
Thank you.
wonderful
This was
time.
fun.
So
This
much.
was
Yeah,
fun.
hopefully we'll have you guys back again.
Would love that.
Appreciate the opportunity to be
All
here.
right.
Thank you.
All right, that's for us. Peace and love.
Bye, everyone.
And thanks for watching, guys.